What's going on, everybody? It's Steiner here. It's another Wednesday, and that means another episode of Secondhand Talent. We have with us today a very, very, very special guest, Mr. Blake Boris-Schacter from Portland, owner and GM and founder of the Get Down, one of the hottest music venues in the nation. Blake, such a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, we start out the interview every single way, and as you and I discussed pre-interview, it's getting a little harder. But had you never heard the term secondhand talent before? Somebody says to you, "Oh, this is secondhand talent." What image, what thought does that conjure up in your head?
Yeah, when I think of, primary talent, I guess, if secondhand is kind of a maybe offshoot, I wouldn't think of it as necessarily a negative thing. I would just think of it as maybe not the talent that's in the spotlight, maybe the talent that happens behind the scenes. I did also, when you initially sent it over, naturally went to look it up, but that was the assumption that I might have.
It's it, I gotta say, it's honestly flattering to hear that when I send out, because this show is nothing without the guests that we have on it, and to hear that guests who are interested in being on the show are taking that initiative to go to the site and look it up and see what it's all about. I mean, that makes my heart soar. So, to I love that. Thanks for taking the time to look it up. Um,
Absolutely.
so as I mentioned, you're the owner, the founder of the Get Down in Portland, but I don't think anybody jumps into music just to own a venue. Like I feel like that's not where we start. I certainly didn't get into this world to have a podcast. Life takes us in strange different places, and I'm curious to hear a little bit more about just how your journey in music started and what brought you into the love of the scene.
Yeah, I think that music was a part of my life early with my parents. And then as I got older, I found music through friends. And I think when it was through other people's music or other people's choices, while I enjoyed that music, I don't think it was until, I started going through my own love lost or, journey for just self-discovery and learning who I was. I certainly through my teenage years had different bands that I'd like because the music just happened to hit at a certain time, or most importantly, the lyrics hit at a certain time, that classic, oh, this person understands my heartache type of stuff.
Is
And
more
then,
than a feeling.
yeah, exactly. And then I think as I got older, I ended up figuring out that music as a scene or people to be around or a shared interest or activity, that certainly became a part of it. But it really wasn't until seeing like my first live music that had huge production that I started feeling a different way about it and feeling a different way about what live music could be as an experience. And from that, discovering recorded music. But it definitely, my love of even recorded music did come from live music experiences and how much those meant to me. Even from a personal level, I think that that's where, at first it's other people telling you what's interesting or what's good and enjoying it. And then again, lyrics or whatnot kind of meaning something. But then for me, discovering live music, how it made me feel just by myself, not the environment that I was around, really is what ended up kind of pulling me into that interest of seeing as much of it as possible and wanting to, make that a priority for me in terms of how I live my life and one of the things that I love to do the most in this world, which is, go see live music.
So let's make a two-parter out of that answer because there's two things you said that really intrigue me. The first was that there's music that you discovered that you connected with on a spiritual level, emotional level, whatever you want to call it, where it, like you said, it meant something to you at the time in a way that maybe we can't put words on. It's an intangible thing, just like music, right? So First, I would love to hear some examples of some of the early music that you really felt you connected with. And then following up on that, you know, given where you're at now, I would love to hear about some of the first live performances, or if there was a definitive live performance that you saw that you were like you that was like a finger snap light bulb moment where you were like, oh yeah, this is it.
Yeah, so when it came to me falling in love with or getting really into the lyrics of songs, the thing that I started repeating, in a CD player, I was living in Australia when I was 15, and I had been recently dumped, and a friend of mine gave me a Matchbox 20 CD, Yourself or Someone Like You, and
I know it
I
well.
yeah, and I listened to that, and he left it in my seat. I don't know if he gave it to me. I think he left it in my CD player, little Walkman, and I stole it for sure, and just listened to it just on repeat all the time. Like those lyrics just like hit me hard, and that's the first time that I found myself feeling that music was understanding me in a different way than maybe other things that were around in my life, other mediums or other outlets, even friends. Like listening to that album, I don't know if it necessarily helped me get over the person. I don't think it's really made for that,
But it
but
helped you get
let me,
through.
yeah, and made me feel that there was, you know, other people that have gone through this, and therefore it was maybe going to be okay in the future. But definitely wore that CD out hard. And that was probably the first time that I chose music for myself, even though obviously it was a friend showing it to me. It was a self-discovery thing on my own on a bus. I remember him having it in the CD player and me having it in mine. It got left there somehow, and listening to it on the bus ride home, and then just repeatedly whenever I could.
It's a great example, and I love what you said there about the music getting you as opposed to you getting the music. I think that's such an important factor that we tend to overlook. I was raised in a very conservative neighbor. Can I ask, by the way, what around what year were we talking about living in Australia?
So this should be 2001, I believe.
Okay, so right around the same time, there was an album that came out by the Vines that had a song on it called Get Free.
Mhm.
And I was raised in a very conservative neighborhood, not a lot of like freedom of, artistic freedom or anything. And I remember hearing Get Free on the radio. And like when you were telling, relating that anecdote, that's the first thing that I thought of. I was like, yeah, that's the first time where I heard a song and I was just like, this says everything that I've been trying to say. Oh my God, how is this even possible? It's such it's an indescribable feeling.
It is.
And then moving on to the live experience aspect of it. This now and knowing that you're a venue owner, I'm extremely curious what was one or some of the first couple, like as you mentioned, high production shows that you attended that you were like, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was even less of a nodding and more of like an explosion, the thing that happens in movies where everything goes silent, the world kind of just fucking looks like it's going to hyperspace. It
Oh
really,
yeah.
so it was Radiohead at in Mansfield, Mass, at the Tweeter Center. I was like 6th row center because a neighbor
Wow.
of mine was a music reviewer, which definitely I think my first couple experiences live music, it was in privileged areas, backstage stuff, things like that. So certainly that might have had some effect eventually on what I wanted to do, but certainly seeing live music with that level of production behind it as well meant a lot. But it also, I don't think it necessarily triggered, oh, I want to be following these people everywhere, because of my interest in lyrics at the time, but not knowing a lot of the lyrics when I was seeing it live made me, immediately run to the recorded element. I went to Newbury Comics and bought every single album that they had there on CD, and proceeded to listen to those pretty nonstop as well.
Was there a particular, I mean, for Radiohead specifically, I've privilege of seeing them only one time, at Parque Arcone. It to this day is one of the best shows I've ever seen. And I'm really not the biggest Radiohead fan, but you know, a decade plus, 2 decades later, seeing that same band play that same music, I can certainly say that the Radiohead show is a transformative experience. And I can't imagine, I mean, it makes so much more sense to me, the life path that and the course that where you're at now, given that that must have been a transcendental experience, especially at that age.
It absolutely was. And I don't think that I've ever, it flipped a switch really, really, really hard. Like it wasn't something that was a slow build. I eventually got there. And there's plenty of things that I love to this day that took a long time for me to get into. And I had seen live music before, but not that much of it. So I really wouldn't describe it as a building block type of moment. And it was literally from the opening chords. Like it hit immediately. It wasn't even like love at first sight. It was just a jaw on the floor type circumstance. And, to your point, Radiohead's kind of one of those bands where there's certain things. I mean, a lot of the times it's Tom's voice or whatnot that people just, oh, I can't get past it. I'm not as into it or anything like that. And
Sure.
some of their stuff too, musically, is a little bit more, I don't know, out there. Some of their
Technical.
albums, well, on some of their albums purposely, I mean, there was a point in their career where they were actively trying to lose fans because they didn't want people constantly wanting those same songs off of OK Computer or whatnot. And they tried to go more experimental, partially for that reason. And, for me, the live experience is one of those that even if you are not as into Radiohead, I think you can go there and still get a lot out of their live music and production and showmanship and really being able to see what they can do live. Because I don't think that they're your typical incredible live band. And there's some indie acts that I would say the same thing about, where you would think from listening to it, you're just getting album reproduction, or you're seeing something that isn't going to be that technically incredible to watch. Whereas some of those bands, regardless of the notes being played or the song construction, can really take it to the next level live. And they're definitely an example for that for me, where again, even if you're not as into them from listening to the recorded stuff, I highly recommend if you get the chance to go see them.
I fully agree, and I love songs like Idiotech is my favorite Radiohead song. And
A lot of
and to be
syncopation.
uh-huh.
A lot of
And,
syncopation on that one, yeah.
but to be perfectly frank, it's not like if I had to pick a list of what are my top bands that I'd like to see again, I don't even know if Radiohead would make the top of that list for the music itself, like the experience of that show. And I'll draw one more parallel to a band I saw at the same venue, Jamiroquai. Um, yeah, I'm not like everybody knows the few songs that everybody knows. I knew a little bit more, but I didn't really know a lot about it going into the show. And kind of like you said about, your experience at the Radiohead show, from the opening notes, it was just this sonic journey that I was being taken on. And it's almost like the music ended and the magic carpet just kind of settled onto the ground. And it's like,
where where did you see them?
so both of those shows were at Park Hayarkon, which is in Tel Aviv. So very wild place to see a concert. And this is also 10 years ago. So this isn't, anything recent.
So
Um,
I just want to mention, I feel the exact same way about the one Jamiroquai show that I ever saw. They were playing at the Bill Graham, and it was a Tuesday.
oh,
So it was a Tuesday, and what had happened was a friend of mine said, hey, this big on sale's happening and I need your help to try to get tickets because it's going to be hard. And,
Right.
any big live music fan, I think, has been through this where, you help
F5,
friends out.
F5, 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 F5,
Yeah,
F5.
you help. Yeah, before there was that terrible walking man queue situation, there was a timing thing that you could do to try to get tickets. And I thought it was pretty good. And especially when you were at in a corporate office, you could get, the T1 line, T3 line, which would make a huge difference. And so I helped get tickets. I got a pair, and I was going to help that person, go to the show, but they also were able to get tickets. So I ended up having these 2 Jamiroquai tickets, and I was like, okay, I'll sell them, but I knew it was a popular show. And so I was just waiting for someone who needed them. And I just on a whim decided, you know what? I haven't seen them. The music's kind of fun. I don't really know that much of it, but I'm going to go, like, whatever. I was living up in Portland at the time. So I flew back down to San Francisco for the show. And from the opening notes, I was like, wow, I am glad that I did this. It was a nonstop dance party, definitely the best Tuesday show that I've ever been to, and I don't expect it to ever get topped. It was an absolute just barn burner. You would have no idea that it was a Tuesday in there. It definitely felt like a party type of environment.
And it doesn't matter if you know all the songs, or like it's
No,
just
it didn't matter
it
at all.
didn't matter at all.
Nope,
Love
didn't
it.
matter.
All
So
right,
fun. And
let's
again, I would say the same thing. It probably wouldn't be super high on the list at all for me from a music perspective. But if you're going to ask me about my top 10 shows, that's probably coming up.
did you start playing drums out of this, or were you already playing?
That is a great question. I don't know. That's really close. It's really close when I went to see that Radiohead show and when I started playing drums. I would assume that I started playing drums beforehand, because I remember the reason that I got into drums, and it was for not the reasons that I would think of post Radiohead. So I am assuming that I got into drums just before, but it's a close timeline. It's like the 15, like I know for my 16th birthday is when I got into drums, but I'm
Gotcha.
not quite sure. It was like 15, or it was like right around that same time. So I'm not sure, but I know that the reasons I got into drums isn't really applicable to having seen live music. So I think that it was probably, I started playing drums beforehand. I probably took it more seriously or was more interested in starting a band after that. But again, the timeline
Gotcha.
is really close.
So we're talking about, like, you're like, hey, I'm gonna pick up an instrument, like start play drums, and then you kind of have this experience at this Radiohead show. And I'm paraphrasing you a little bit here, but you mentioned something earlier about how that just kind of like boosted your drive to see live music, to be a part of it. And I'm curious if that had any impact on your growing intensity afterwards to like develop your skills playing drums.
Yeah, I'm sure that it did. I mean, seeing live music, if you play instruments, are going to probably give you motivation. I mean, it's one of two things, right? You're either seeing music and you're thinking, man, I want to just like put myself, my all into this. Sometimes you see live music, and honestly, the opposite happens for musicians sometimes, where you get discouraged because who you're seeing live is so much better, and you don't think you're necessarily
Mm.
going to get to that point. And I think that that's something that musicians are constantly, I think, dealing with, at least from my perspective. Like sometimes I see music and I'm so motivated to wanting to get better and reach a certain point. And sometimes I wouldn't say it's discouraging so much as it's just like, wow, that person is so good. And I don't know how they've gotten there. I think one of the things that I always try to do in those types of moments is concentrate on, well, what are the things that I want to take from this and get better at? An example of that, seeing Tool, when I saw Tool live the first time, I was both of those things, highly motivated to try to get better because I loved what I was seeing, but also at the same time, so blown away and somewhat discouraged. And then I remember leaving my first Tool show, and feeling that of, oh my God, like, how am I going to ever be good enough? And then I
Mhm.
decided to just read some forums and see interviews and just see how he had maybe built up where he had gotten to. And I actually ended up completely rearranging the way that I practiced and also my entire drum
Oh,
setup. And
wow.
one of the cool things with drums is you can change your placement and it can completely change your arm movements and how things work. And Danny Carey uses a centered hi-hat, and that was something that really interested me when I saw him live. But in seeing it live, it made so much sense to me on why he'd want to do that. But then reading the forums afterwards when he discussed why he did that, it motivated me so much that I actually ended up rearranging my entire drum set and essentially relearning how to play some aspects of drumming based on having a centered hi-hat.
I mean, that's massive. And I mean, one of the things that conjured up in my head as you were saying that, how it can be inspiring and daunting at the same time. Um, our very second interview on this show was my friend Mike Leighton, who's a luthier, and he had a similar experience where he was a musician, he's a guitar player, and at a live music at a concert, live music concert, I don't know, at a show, he kind of had this moment where he was like I want to be that dude shredding up there, but I know that like I'm not I don't have it like that. I can play, but I don't have it like that. And so he decided to get an apprenticeship to become a luthier because his thought process was, well, if I can't shred the axe the way I want to on stage, at least the people whose music I love and respect can play the guitars that I build. And, and that truly for me, that was an eye-opening moment because I had never even considered that. And since then, one of the core messages of the show is there is a place for you in live music. It doesn't matter if you play an instrument or not, if you're good at it, there is always a place for you in live music. It's just a matter of being open-minded toward discovering, what your right lane is. And, in Mike's case, that was to build the instrument that he wanted to see people shred on. And now we've come to the point where I'm curious to hear about, well, before we get to what started the Get Down, um, most people, I would think our average listener or viewer would is would maybe benefit from a bit of a talk about the lateral movement to the venue space, the venue operation space, and how that journey happens. Because I think a lot of folks, we try to, like I said, show people that there's a place for everyone in this. I think a lot of folks wonder, how do people get into those spaces? Like what's the like how do you become a front of house guy? How do you become a light director? Like what is it that moves people into those spaces? So I'm very curious to hear, like, was there a particular experience or opportunity that you had that wanted you to become more involved with the business side of things?
Yes, it also involved Radiohead.
All
I
right, continuity.
Yeah, so I tried to buy Radiohead tickets. I was 18 and oh no, that's not true. I was probably 21. I was junior year of college. I was doing a junior first half of senior year, and I was doing a internship, which was required through my major. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was a communication and culture major because I had the least amount of required credits, and I was just trying to figure out what the hell I wanted to do with my life because I wasn't super passionate about anything that I wanted to do later in life. I had found things that I enjoyed doing, but nothing that necessarily spoke to a career.
Mm.
And I tried to buy Radiohead tickets, had a terrible experience in the Ticketmaster world, as we all do sometimes. And
Hmm.
I got so frustrated with it and started thinking about, well, how the hell does this company operate? Because everyone hates them. They don't do anything particularly inventive from the front end side, and the user experience isn't, that good. So how do they operate? And so one of the things with the internship that I was doing, it was trying to build an online presence. It was based on search engine optimization, blah, blah, blah. It was stuffy office job. Only time I wore a tie. I knew I didn't want that. That had been solved.
Yeah,
But
sure.
I ended up, essentially doing a little research paper type thing of trying to figure out how Ticketmaster operated. And the answer got me so mad, but also so determined to do something, because when I did the research, I just came to the realization that I didn't think this was going to be able to be solved through traditional methods. It wasn't going to be some invention that took them out. It wasn't going to be, progression over time with tech. The way that they operated was so well built within the capitalist society that we live in, that the only thing that I could come up with was to eventually own and operate enough venues that it makes sense to start my own ticketing company and do things differently. So I came to the conclusion that I wanted to get into the side of production or ownership or all of that, just based on this passion against wanting to change it. And the only thing I could come up with was this. So the route that I ended up taking was a pretty non-traditional one in music. A lot of the time, I think when people end up owning venues, they're in music with something else, and it leads them up to that kind of point where
Sure.
they're a promoter, or they work their way in venues, become a, manager, and then maybe open up their own spot, those types of things. And for me, it was much more like I knew the long-term goal and then had to figure out the route that I wanted to take to get there. I ended up, because I knew I wanted to own venues, not just, work in them.
Sure.
Working my way up through venues, venues aren't really set up necessarily for that. You start, as a ticket taker, start as, security or any of those things. It's not necessarily built for you to just work your way up. So I thought that a corporate structure was actually going to make more sense for me to be able to get to my eventual goal. So I started as an administrative assistant at a production company, doing essentially whoever hired us their events, but essentially any type of corporate event, tech event type thing. So I started in the production side of things, doing admin work, etc., with this eventual goal of getting there. I ended up doing, production stuff in San Francisco for about 3.5 years, and then ended up jumping over to the tech side because they pay more money. And eventually I knew I was going to need money.
Yeah.
And so I worked on the tech production side, building up, essentially it's a marketing job, but you hire the production company staff that I used to, be. So I knew both sides of that world, and eventually worked my way till the point that I thought a bank might give me a loan, and did essentially a cover letter. It wasn't really a business plan, a very, very, high level outline that started with, hey, I've never worked in music venues ever, but here's why I think you should give me money to start a venue. And that was either going to be 8 years of, hard work to reach a goal that they were going to laugh me out of the room, or they were going to say, no, this makes sense. Like, you do the things that we look for, how to manage the large scale budgets and all that stuff, the corporate side, and this is a worthwhile risk. And it ended up being, luckily, that other option.
It's an extremely non-traditional way
Yes.
to come
I
into it.
don't
And
know many, I don't know many people with that background or that route to get to this particular point.
well, not to that particular point, but I can tell you honestly, if you would have told me a year ago from the time of this taping that I would have a podcast, let alone be filming season 3, I would have laughed you out the door. I did not become a comedian to do stand-up comedy. I became a comedian to get free tickets to concerts. And my thought process was, well, a lot of these big concerts have after parties, and sometimes they need hosts and MCs. And if I'm funny, also, like maybe I can kind of get that worked in somehow. And fortunately, I'm here in Chicago, and I had the opportunity of meeting some wonderful people who brought me into the scene in the late 2000s. And I've done plenty of stand-up comedy career, and I continue to in my career, and I continue to write jokes, performed 1,000 times on 3 continents. I absolutely love it, and I'll never get tired of it. That being said, you know, I don't think that necessarily it's so funny seeing all these stand-up comedians now having podcasts because people immediately assume when I tell them that I have a podcast that it's a comedy podcast. And I just took another left turn and was like, no, 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 no. This is my passion has always been music. The music is the world I've always wanted to live in. If it that means taking comedy, taking podcasts, doing all this other stuff, and using those as the non-traditional stepping stones to get to this place, so be it. It's actually quite refreshing to hear another non-traditional story, because for not just for me, but I'm sure for everybody tuning in as well, because and re-emphasizing that point of you can do it too. Like where there's a will, there's a way. And I think that's fabulous. I now moving into so you spent some time in California doing production work there. You've went into tech for a little bit to shore up some funds. Is the Get Down now the first venue that you owned, or is it
Yes.
okay? So, what was the impetus that you were like, this is the time? The time is now.
Yeah, I can't say that there is. So I think it was more my life trajectory and when I thought that it made sense in terms of when I was ready or the time was there. And I'd say the main reason that that was the time was because I just hit the point that I was done with San Francisco, just in terms of living there. And the thing that I had said for a while, I'd moved to San Francisco to start my career, went sight unseen. It was an amazing time from 22 to 30. And I was right in the thick of things in the Nob Hill, Tenderloin area. And it was super fun. Saw so much music, went to all the festivals, worked a ton as well, and just had a really, really great time in my 20s. And, this was kind of the dream was backburnered because I knew that I needed X amount of years of experience. It wasn't an exact science, though, of when I thought that I was ready. And I ended up just deciding, okay, like I'm ready, I think, to move. And I had always had this in my mind that I was looking for the right place to do it. And San Francisco has plenty of great venues, has a very expensive barrier to entry to get into that network. And
Yes.
I always knew that San Francisco was not the city. So, and I had a rent control apartment. So when I was ready to leave, I needed to make sure that I was ready to leave. And so
Mm-hmm.
it kind of hit me all at once of, okay, I think I'm ready to do this. And Portland had been on the list as I had visited friends out here and had started doing some research. But as I started looking at places to move to and where I could maybe get a house and all of that, Portland became more and more my focus, not only from this move, but also with this goal of, hey, I'm going to open up a venue. And Portland became the number one after doing some competitive research in the area and learning a couple of things that made Portland an attractive market. So I ended up deciding to move up with the venue in mind, but I wouldn't say it was like, oh, I needed this amount of experience or this amount of years, or this was the particular moment that this opportunity opened up, it was more, okay, I'm ready for the next thing. And this was always going to be the next thing after San Francisco. And so I ended up moving up with that goal and with that intention. And
So I think one of the things you said is it's very important that we don't overlook it, which is that you make the hard comparisons of where to go, what the best fit is going to be for you, but it's not just about venue. Like if you're coming to a place to establish a venue, you're setting up your life there. And the research isn't just like what buildings are available for rent that have the best acoustics. It's, house, is there a network and a community there? Is there going to be people that are going to be drawn to the area? Am I going to be able to make a living if, for some reason things go sideways? Like, is it a big enough space to where I could find something to do? And, the reason I want to reemphasize that is because a lot of people, I feel like when people move for opportunities in music, the casual fan doesn't necessarily consider the ramifications of you're really uprooting your life and settling it down in a new place. And it's a daunting thing. It's a daunting thing to do to be able to to be able to factor in all of those elements in your research, in your decision making. And I mean, besides for the ones that I think most people can come up with in a common sense fashion, was there a particular element of the Portland scene that you were that really made that kind of made you decide that this is the fit for me?
I wouldn't say it was the scene. For
Mm,
me, for me, it is a little bit more pragmatic. So there are two things in particular that made Portland the most attractive market for me to open up the Get Down in. One is the cost of liquor licenses here. In most major
mm,
cities, so in most major cities, or especially the two, so I'm initially from outside Boston, moved to San Francisco. Those two markets, you're looking at $200,000 to $300,000 for a liquor license. Extremely expensive. A huge amount of what my eventual starting budget was. And in the case of Portland, because it's a liquor control state, so similar to New Hampshire, you're buying directly from the government. But because of that, they actually keep their liquor licenses quite low because they're trying to encourage new business. And they also,
mm.
they make the profit off of liquor sales. So it's $800 a year for a liquor license in Portland. So a massive, massive difference to that. And then the second element is Portland is the largest market in the US by far at this juncture that does not have a Ticketmaster Live Nation venue currently in it. So it's easier for me to come in, start a venue, and not get blocked, let's say politely, by the powers that be in terms of how national routing would work. So
And
it became a lot. It became a attractive market mostly for those two reasons. I also did know something about the music venues, etc., out here, and bringing in something that I knew would be somewhat new. Trying to do a decent amount of renovations beforehand. It was a market that hadn't had a ton of new venues pop up recently, and I thought that it was a market that made some sense for what I was trying to do up here.
yeah, blocked or sidetracked is a very nice way of putting it, but that's a huge point that I hadn't even considered. Um, Ticketmaster and Live Nation are two massive, massive, massive companies that, I'm in
One.
Chicago. One massive, yeah, you're right. Thanks, antitrust laws. But all that aside, I mean, I'm here in Chicago. I've been watching venues get snapped up. This is where I started. My roots in performing and entertainment are here. And the corporatization of what used to be family owned places and smaller theaters that either don't exist or have transferred ownership because they can't compete. It's really been like the three venues that I started performing at no longer exist in Chicago for various reasons. But had they existed 5 years longer than they did, they would have been shut down by this or would have had to have been bought up. And by the way, real quick, how did you get involved in the Heady Wax Fiends group?
So Chris is a good friend of mine. Uh, I never, who's the person who initially started it. So I
Right,
never,
no, Chris Holland, right?
yeah, Chris Howland. Yeah. So I never collected vinyl, but I knew that he was into it. And so I'd occasionally go, and my dad was also into it. So I'd occasionally go and shop for them. I had a big CD collection that was like the most important thing to me through my high school years. And I knew that whenever I were to get into vinyl, it was going to be an absolute avalanche that I was, that I purposely protected myself from for a while. He added me to the group, whether I wanted to be in it or not. And, just watching people post about it, etc., I think got me in this mindset. And I, pandemic happened and was, on obviously online a little bit more than I probably would have been normally, and following that group and following people we're listening to. And I had always decided that the album that I would buy first, if I ever found it in the wild, was going to be Lovage, Music to Make
Oh
Love
yeah,
to.
okay. All right. Yeah, yeah,
Great,
yeah.
one of my favorite albums of all time. And I drunkenly one night bid for it on eBay and woke up the next day and had bought the record or won the record. And so I realized, okay, now I guess I'm getting the rest of it. So that triggered a very, very big buying spree. But, a huge part of it was I couldn't see live music anymore.
Yep.
So upgrading my ability to listen to music in my house and then starting a record collection was one of the things that kept me sane through it. And, that group was a huge help slash a huge, a addiction that was definitely being fed through the group. And so I ended up buying a ton of records. Chris ended up offering to me if I wanted to be an admin, and I said sure. So I ended up getting involved from that perspective.
I mean, so I've been a part of it for pretty much about the same length of time that you have since around when Chris started it. It's one of the most fun, wholesome communities on the internet exists.
Absolutely.
I think it, and, shout out Chris. You guys, everybody who's on the admin team. I mean, it's such a hard ship to steer, and it's growing on a day, literally on a daily basis. And I gotta ask, is has being a part of that group helped you source acts for the venue?
Yes. And it's actually been like we had Dale Donato somewhat recently. And the only reason that we were able to get that is because the group had gotten so into Dale Donato that I reached out to my booker and said, hey, we need to be aggressive about this act. They hadn't come to the West Coast yet. And I wanted to make sure that we were the first place that they played. And so that was actually a major reason. So some of the acts that come up through Heady Wax Fiends that I see, getting talked about, I'm definitely more aggressive about trying to book. And we've actually ended up having a decent amount of the acts. And then some vice versa. I've ended up putting, at least as part of the record club, some of the acts, especially in the early stages when we were booking, because I could kind of not only reach out to them about getting booked at the Get Down, but also reach out to them about, hey, would you like to be part of this record subscription club? So there's some vice versa stuff, and we're continuing to work on more ways to integrate the record club and the group itself with the venue. And that's something I'm certainly excited about, the different ways that we're going to be able to grow it over time. It definitely, it's music, and they're both, in groups that are music aficionados on both sides. And so the more integration as possible, especially since, he's a close friend, the better for sure.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that developing that synergy and that back and forth. You mentioned an artist like Daniel Donato. Shout out to Daniel Donato and the Cosmic Country, by the way. If y'all haven't seen them yet, my dear listeners and viewers, please do yourselves a favor and go see them. They are absolutely ripping it up. I had the opportunity to see him a couple of months ago. Outstanding show.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really cool. I mean, I love to I love, it's something I have been wondering about for a long time. I was like, there's got to be some sort of like back and forth. And it's really nice to hear that a lot of these newer bands, newer artists that are putting out records that we're putting in the Heady Wax Fiends record club, that gives you that we have people in that group such as yourself who are able to give those acts a platform and a stage and in more ways than one. I think that that's just so important for the development of new music, especially being someone who is outside of that Live Nation bubble, outside of that Ticketmaster bubble, because you truly do represent a a really small but extremely important facet of the live music industry. Talent. Like, have you found this experience? Have you found working with people in this environment easy? Has it been difficult? What have there been complications on the way? Because I think of owning a venue and booking shows, and I would say the average perception of it is like it's a real good time. You just sit back and bring in bands, and most people don't see the grunt work that goes in. Um, Starting it up from scratch, notwithstanding, starting up from scratch, notwithstanding, what are some things, some experiences you could point to that were like learning curve moments for you, where you were able to say, hey, yeah, this is that's something I had expected when I was doing my initial calculations for owning a venue.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to hiring people at the Get Down, it ended up being, because of the time, I gave myself a very tight timeline, just as you kind of need to when you're building something out that's this big and expensive. Timelines get really tight, especially early in businesses. And honestly, when it came to hiring, other than the kind of couple primary people that I brought in before the craziness, it actually ended up being a lot of me not even being able to be super involved. Like when it came to like hiring security and, bartenders, I have a bar manager and he hired all the bartenders and he did an amazing job at that. Andrew Harrison is a huge part of the Get Down. He runs the entire bar program and does an amazing job at it. But when it came to hiring security, I honestly didn't have the time with the amount of build out and the timeline that we were dealing with. And so my partner, Beth Lipson, she ended up creating the hire documents and making it so that she was setting up all the interviews and everything. And, that work at the time being so important, but at the same time, something that I just didn't have time for. She has a background in music. She had actually done a more traditional musical route where she worked at the Fillmore for, I think, 6 or 7 years.
Right on.
And had a huge amount of experience in the actual music industry portion. And so her knowledge and capabilities and time that she was able to commit to finding people was really important. And, some of the initial hires that we made didn't end up being long-term hires for one reason or another, but some of them, including Kevin Williams, he's my box office manager. He actually was our first hire and he was our first interview ever. And he was actually a cold reach out that just reached out via email when we first announced, when we kind of first had set up these email boxes, and that ended up working, really, really well. And, I find that now we have most of our staff that works here are here for the long haul. And that's really an incredible thing. I think a lot of live music can be built off of, cycling in either new or
Yes,
young people, and, kind of
absolutely.
feeding off that passion, but then not necessarily giving people room to grow. And one of the things that I've tried to do is figure out ways for the people that are committed to being here to keep them engaged, keep them learning new things, but most importantly, keeping people passionate about this space. And, that's one of the things that has worked out really well. So of course, some people work and some people don't, but the people that are really, really involved in the get down, as you would call them, secondhand talent, for me are such an important building block, not just for people's perception of the get down. When they get here, when you're in an environment that people aren't excited to be in. And so that's our sound techs, that's our lighting techs, that's our production managers, that's even the bartenders. If they walk up and need something, we're always trying to greet people in that, friendly and nice way while still maintaining a very professional and good environment. And, those long hours that people are willing to put in, every time I ask anyone for something on site, it's always, a happy yes in terms of being able to help. And that network of knowing that if someone can't come in, or, I need something that's outside the ordinary, people are willing to do that. But I do try to make sure that that's always acknowledged and brought out of people, and making sure they're not taking for granted the incredible people that work here and are always willing to step up. And I do think that I've talked about this in other conversations, but this idea of staff, patrons, and artists being this really important triad that creates a great show. And you can't have one without the other. And the staffing portion for me tends to be one of the items that are most overlooked in venues in terms of how that's built, and trying to, again, building it for the future, instead of having this revolving door of who can put up with this job for the longest, versus how do I get people excited about coming to work and being a part of it. And I think that that really does bring out a better patron and artist experience. So I do think of those people as just such an important part of the get down and what they do here, because it creates an elevated experience for those other two elements that, again, brings out, the best shows and the best experiences, and brings people and artists wanting to come back.
Well, and it's so refreshing to hear that, because you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been in this industry long enough, you have as well, to have seen the cyclical nature of employment, let's call it, in this industry. And to and again, one of the big messages of this show is, if nothing else, when you're at a concert, take a moment to say thank you to some of the people that are working at the venue. You don't know what kind of day someone is having, and how far a small little smile and a thank you will go. If you're going through security, let the guy know, hey, thanks for keeping us safe. If you think the LD's killing it, go up, when you're walking past him with your beer, just be like, hey buddy, you're killing it tonight. And just give that little bit of recognition, and that little bit of verbal courtesy, and appreciation. And it's really awesome to hear that ethos reflected from an ownership perspective, because it's like culture is everything. It's about wanting to be there. It's about being happy to show up for your job. It's about knowing that you have a reliable management team above you that you can come to when you have any issues. And that's what builds a successful venue, so we can all get down.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
Well,
Yeah,
well,
it's those little things as well. I just want to reiterate, they mean the world to everyone that works here. Like every single thing that you said, those are exactly how it's best to interact with people. I mean, there are no easy jobs at venues. I will tell you that much. There's not a single job that exists here that is an easy job. They're all difficult in different ways, and especially on any given night could be extremely difficult. And so every time that people thank my staff, I know it means the absolute world to them. And it means a lot to me too. When people tell me that this place is amazing and that we're doing an amazing job, etc., I always encourage them to make sure that they're telling every single person that makes it that way, because it really, really is a team sport in a highly just highly pressurized environment. Like we are constantly dealing with a lot of stuff either that people see or don't see. And I think it's so important to express that appreciation. I can't reiterate that enough.
And it's free, right? And
Yeah,
and it
doesn't
doesn't
take
cost you a
any.
thing, and you're having a good time anyway. And it's just, the impact is immeasurable. Ripple in still water, right? The ripple effect of that little piece of kindness. You don't know what kind of build out that'll have. Well, Blake, thank you so much for being on the show. This again, first venue owner we've had on the program, and really, this conversation makes me want to come to Portland to check out the Get Down. And, at the time of this taping, I'm sure I could list all the concerts coming up, but go over to the website. We'll have all the links in the comments, a description of the episode, so you could check out everything about the upcoming events. If you're ever in the Portland area, it's the place to be. Blake, thank you so much for being on the show. Appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for the great conversation.
And we'll see y'all next Wednesday. And that's a podcast. All right. Now we're gonna record like this.